Last Tuesday, I signed the papers that officially disinherited my only daughter, Jessica. The ink was a deep, final black on the page, and as I pushed the document across the lawyer's polished desk, the only thing I could smell was the faint scent of wood polish, a smell that used to mean home, safety, and a father's love. I know what you're probably thinking. What kind of father does that to his own child? It sounds cold, unforgiving. But before you cast your judgment, you need to hear how I ended up in that sterile office, making a decision that went against every instinct I'd ever had as a parent. You need to hear the exact words my daughter used when she told me I was no longer a part of her life, simply because my hands, the same hands that built her cradle, could no longer build furniture. She called me useless. That one word changed everything. It was the spark that ignited a fire I thought had long died out. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts on this story in the comments. Now, let me tell you how it all began. My whole life I believed you could measure a man's worth by the work of his hands. My workshop was my sanctuary, a place where the air was always thick with the scent of freshly cut pine and cedar, a smell I've come to associate with quiet satisfaction. For 40 years, that small, dusty space attached to the back of my house was more than just a place of work. It was where I translated my love for my family into something solid, something you could touch and lean on. After my wife Ellen passed away, that workshop became the center of my universe. It was just me and my little girl Jessica. The steady rhythm of the saw and the patient scrape of sandpaper were how I promised both of them that everything would be okay. I built the house we lived in, board by board. The kitchen table, made of solid oak, was where Jessica did her homework every night after school. I can still see her there, head bent over a textbook, a stray curl falling across her forehead as she chewed on the end of her pencil. The surface of that table is mapped with the history of her childhood. A faint ring from a glass of spilled milk I could never quite sand away. A tiny notch near the edge where she dropped a pair of scissors during a school project. I ran my hand over those imperfections often. They were reminders of a life well lived, a life I had built for her. The sturdy 4-poster bed in her old room, the one I crafted from cherry wood for her 16th birthday, was my prayer for her safety, for peaceful dreams in a world I couldn't always protect her from. Every morning began the same way. I'd wake before the sun, the floorboards cool beneath my feet, and make a pot of strong black coffee. I'd sit in the worn leather armchair by the window, the one Ellen had always loved, and watch the sky lighten from charcoal gray to a soft, hazy blue. The first rays of sun would spill into the workshop, illuminating the sawdust dancing in the air like tiny golden spirits. Those quiet moments were mine. They were when I felt closest to Ellen, and when I gathered my strength for the long day of labor ahead. My hands, thick with calluses and mapped with a lifetime of tiny scars, were my most trusted tools. They knew the language of wood, how to coax a story from a raw plank of timber. My greatest project, the one I poured all my hopes into, was a rocking chair. I started it the day Jessica told me she was getting married to Mark. He was a man who wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage, and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. But he made Jessica happy, and that was all that mattered to me. I chose the finest piece of maple I had stored away, wood I'd been saving for something special. As I worked on that chair, sanding its curves until they were as smooth as river stone, I didn't just see a piece of furniture. I saw Jessica, years from now, humming a lullaby to my grandchild. I pictured a tiny hand wrapped around her finger, the gentle creak of the runners on the floorboards, the only sound in a quiet nursery. That chair wasn't just made of wood. It was built from a father's dreams for his daughter's future. When they decided to buy a house, I didn't hesitate. I went to the bank and withdrew $75,000 from my retirement savings. It was nearly everything I had. It was the sum of every vacation I never took, every new truck I never bought, every little luxury I had denied myself over the decades. I handed them the check at that same oak kitchen table. Jessica cried and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered into my shoulder. "We couldn't do this without you." Mark just shook my hand, his grip firm and brief. "We appreciate this, Arthur," he said, his eyes already calculating. I saw the check not as money but as a foundation, another solid, dependable thing I had built to ensure my daughter's happiness. I believed I was investing in her future, cementing a legacy of a father's unwavering love. I thought, naively, that I was finally done building. I thought my work was complete, The first sign that something was wrong was subtle, like the first hairline crack in a sturdy piece of timber. It appeared a few weeks after they moved into their new house. I had spent a full month putting the finishing touches on the maple rocking chair, sanding it until the wood felt like silk and applying coat after coat of varnish until it gleamed with a deep, honey-colored light. Loading it into the back of my old pickup truck, I felt a familiar ache in my shoulders, but it was a good ache, the kind that comes from creating something meant to last. I drove over to their new neighborhood, a place with manicured lawns and houses that all looked vaguely the same, a stark contrast to the comfortable, lived-in feel of my own street. Their house was clean. That's the only word for it. The walls were a stark white, the floors a polished gray tile that clicked coldly under my work boots. The air didn't smell of anything. Not of dinner cooking, not of wood smoke, not even of people. It smelled like a magazine picture. Jessica gave me a quick, distracted hug at the door. Mark was on his phone in the living room. A vast space with a single black leather sofa and a television the size of my workbench. He nodded at me over the screen. "Arthur, good to see you." He didn't get up. "I brought you something," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the cavernous room. "A housewarming gift." I went back out to the truck and carefully carried the rocking chair inside. I set it down on the gray tile, its worn maple curves looking completely out of place, like a wildflower growing through concrete. "I made it for you. For the nursery one day." Jessica's eyes widened for a moment, and I saw a flash of the little girl I knew. "Oh, Daddy, it's beautiful." She ran a hand over the smooth arc of the armrest, her touch hesitant. Mark finally put his phone down and walked over, circling the chair as if it were a museum exhibit he didn't quite understand. "Wow," he said, drawing the word out. "That's very traditional." He looked at Jessica, a quick, meaningful glance I wasn't supposed to see. "Honey, I'm not sure where this would go." "It doesn't exactly match the minimalist aesthetic we decided on." "We could put it in the guest room for now," Jessica suggested, her voice small. "The guest room is for my Peloton," Mark said flatly. He turned to me, forcing a smile that was all teeth. "It's a very generous thought, Arthur, really. We'll store it in the garage for now, to keep it safe." The garage. My masterpiece, the physical embodiment of my dreams for her family, was going to be stored in the garage, next to the lawnmower and dusty boxes. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, but I just nodded. I didn't want to cause a scene. I had given them $75,000, and my gift of love was being relegated to a storage space. Over a dinner of takeout salad served in plastic containers, the cracks deepened. Mark talked endlessly about their plans for the house. "We're having the entire kitchen remodeled," he announced. "Italian marble countertops, custom cabinetry. It's going to cost a fortune, around $40,000, but it's an investment in our lifestyle." He said it while looking directly at me, as if to remind me that my contribution, my life's savings, was just a drop in the bucket of their expenses. I tried to connect with Jessica, asking her about her job at the marketing firm. "It's fine," she said, pushing a piece of lettuce around her container. "Busy. Mark thinks I should ask for a promotion soon. We need the extra income for the renovations." Her eyes were dull, lacking the spark they once had when she talked about her passions. She was echoing him, her words a reflection of his ambition. The final cut came as I was leaving. I was standing at the door, and Mark put a hand on my shoulder. His grip was light, condescending. "Thanks again for the chair, Arthur. It's great that you have a hobby to keep you busy in that old workshop of yours." A hobby. 40 years of back-breaking labor, of building a life from scratch, of providing for my daughter with the skill of my 2 hands, and he called it a hobby. I looked at Jessica, hoping she would defend me, hoping she would say something. But she just stood beside her husband, her arms crossed, looking at the polished gray floor. She didn't meet my eyes. I drove home that night with the windows down, but I couldn't get the sterile, chemical smell of their new house out of my nostrils. When I walked back into my own home, the familiar, comforting scent of pine and cedar felt different. It felt like the past. It felt lonely. The accident happened on a Tuesday. I remember the high-pitched scream of the circular saw as it bucked, the flash of silver, and then a blinding white-hot pain that shot up my arm. The doctor's office smelled of antiseptic and bad news. He was a kind man, with tired eyes that had clearly delivered their share of life-altering verdicts. He held up the X-rays against the light, a ghostly image of shattered bones and severed tendons. "The fine motor control is gone, Arthur," he said, his voice soft but absolute. "There will be therapy, but your carpentry days are over." The words didn't feel real. It was like he was talking about someone else, some other man whose hands had failed him. I drove home in a daze, my right hand swaddled in a thick, clumsy bandage that felt like a foreign object. My workshop was silent, the air still and heavy with the scent of sawdust I would never make again. A week later, they came, Jessica and Mark. They let themselves in with the key I'd given them years ago, the one on the little wooden keychain I had carved for her. I was sitting at the oak kitchen table, trying to open a jar of instant coffee with one hand, and failing. The silence in the house had become a presence, a constant companion. Mark was wearing a crisp gray suit, carrying a leather portfolio under his arm. He looked like he was walking into a business meeting, not his father-in-law's home. Jessica trailed behind him, her gaze fixed on the floorboards, the same ones she used to slide across in her socks as a little girl. She wouldn't look at me. "Dad?" she started, her voice barely a whisper. Mark cut her off, placing his portfolio on the table with a soft thud. He pulled out a chair for Jessica, then one for himself, his movements efficient and devoid of warmth. "Arthur, we need to have a serious discussion about the future," he said, his tone smooth and rehearsed. He opened the portfolio. "We've been looking at the numbers." I just stared at him, then at my daughter, who was tracing the grain of the wood on the table with her fingertip. My table. The one where I'd helped her with her fractions, where we'd celebrated 17 of her birthdays, where I'd sat with her the night her mother died, holding her hand until the sun came up. "Your disability payment will be approximately $1,250 a month," Mark continued, tapping a spreadsheet he'd printed out. "The mortgage on this house is $900. Property taxes, utilities, you're looking at a deficit of at least $400 a month before you even buy food. Your savings are gone, we know that. Financially, this house is no longer a viable option." He spoke as if he were discussing a failing company, not my life. Every word was a sterile, calculated blow. He slid a glossy brochure across the polished oak surface. It stopped right next to my bandaged hand. The title read, "Golden Sunset Assisted Living." The cover featured a smiling, silver-haired couple playing checkers on a perfectly manicured lawn. Their smiles were as artificial as the plastic flowers in the lobby I could already imagine. The walls inside would be a pale, institutional green, and the air would smell of bleach and quiet despair. My heart felt like a block of ice in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I ignored Mark, pushing the brochure away without looking at it. My eyes were locked on my daughter. "Jessica?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What is this? What is he talking about?" She finally looked up. Her eyes were cold, distant, like a stranger's. There was no trace of the little girl who used to run to me with a scraped knee, confident that her daddy could fix anything. She had Mark's pragmatism in her gaze now. "Dad, we've talked about it." "There's no other way," she said, her voice flat. "Our expenses are already so high. The new mortgage is $300 a month. We have the car payments, the kitchen renovation." She recited the list as if it were a shield. "This is my home, Jessie," I whispered, the name I hadn't used in years slipping out. "I built this home." A flicker of something, shame, maybe, crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by a hard resolve. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "And what are we supposed to do with you now?" she asked, her voice rising, sharp and brittle. "Pay for it? Look after you? Mark is right. You can't work. You can't contribute." She took a step back, her hands clenched at her sides. She looked from my bandaged hand to my face, and the final words came out, each one a perfectly aimed stone. "You're just useless." Useless. The word didn't echo. It landed in the center of the room and simply stayed there, sucking all the air, all the warmth, all the history out of the space. It was the sound of a foundation cracking. I looked down at my hands. The right one, a useless bundle of white gauze. The left one, calloused and scarred from 40 years of labor. The hands that had built her cradle, fixed her bicycle, and proudly handed her a check for $75,000. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was a terrifying, profound clarity. The grief was gone. The shock was gone. In their place, something cold and hard began to form. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't say another word. I just looked at her, at the daughter I no longer recognized, and let my silence answer. They stood there for a moment, waiting for me to break, to cry, to yell, to plead. Mark had a look of smug finality on his face, the look of a man who has just closed a difficult but necessary business deal. Jessica's expression was a blank wall, carefully constructed to show nothing at all. I gave them none of it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shed a tear. The raging storm inside me was silent, a hurricane behind glass. I simply sat at my oak table, the one I had built, and looked at my bandaged hand resting on its surface. I felt the last embers of a father's unconditional love for his child turn to cold, hard ash. "Well?" Mark said, clearing his throat, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "I'll leave these papers for you to look over. They detail the move-in process for Golden Sunset. The first payment is due on the 15th. He slid the portfolio toward me, its smooth leather a stark contrast to the worn wood. I didn't look at it. I didn't look at him. My gaze remained fixed on my daughter. I wanted to sear the image of her face into my memory. This version of her, the stranger standing in my kitchen. She finally flinched, her eyes darting away. "We'll be in touch, Dad," she mumbled, turning to follow her husband to the door. She didn't look back. The click of the front door closing was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of an ending. I sat there for a long time. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the same way it had 1,000 other times. But today, they didn't look like golden spirits. They looked like tiny, scattered pieces of a shattered life. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of pain and disbelief, began to clear. A strange, icy calm washed over me. The skills I had spent a lifetime honing, patience, precision, the ability to see a finished product in a raw piece of material, were still there. They hadn't been in my hand. They had been in my head all along. I thought about the $75,000. It wasn't a gift. I saw that now. It was a transaction, and I had failed to read the fine print. I thought about the rocking chair, a symbol of a future that would never exist, now relegated to a garage. I thought about the word useless. They had made their assessment. They had written me off. A quiet, cold resolve settled deep in my bones. It wasn't about revenge, not in the hot-blooded way you see in movies. It was about balance. It was about justice. It was about proving that the value of a man is not determined by his ability to earn, but by his character. And they were about to receive a masterclass on the subject. They thought they were putting an old man out to pasture. They had no idea they were setting a strategist free. They would not see this coming. I finally stood up, my movements slow and deliberate, and walked over to the counter. With my one good hand, I managed to twist the lid off the coffee jar. The small victory felt monumental. The planning had already begun. The day after the letter arrived, the world looked different. The gray, water-stained ceiling of my room at Golden Sunset didn't seem as oppressive. The pervasive smell of bleach and boiled vegetables was still there, but it no longer felt like the scent of my own decay. It was temporary. I held the letter from the law firm, the paper already soft from being folded and unfolded a dozen times. The number, $4 million, was no longer just a figure. It was a key. With my good left hand, I picked up the cheap plastic phone by my bed, the cord tangled and sticky. I dialed the number for the lawyer recommended in the letter, a man named David Chen. My fingers felt steady. For the first time in months, they felt like my own again. My meeting with him was scheduled for October 3rd. I took a city bus to his downtown office, my old work pants feeling loose, and my flannel shirt out of place among the sea of dark suits. His office was on the 34th floor, and the elevator ride was so smooth and silent it felt like ascending to another world. The office itself was the opposite of my workshop. It was all dark mahogany, cool leather, and glass, with a panoramic view of the city that made the cars below look like tiny, insignificant insects. David Chen was a man about Mark's age, but his eyes were sharp and attentive. not dismissive. He listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story, from the workshop to the accident, to the check for $75,000, to the final cutting word, useless. I spoke in a low, even tone. The emotion was a current deep beneath the surface, but the words were solid facts. When I finished, he leaned back in his large leather chair, tapping a pen on a legal pad. "First," he said, his voice calm and precise, "this offer of $4 million from Omnicorp Developments is a starting point. A low-ball offer, designed to see if you're desperate. You are not desperate, Arthur." He looked me straight in the eye. "You are a man who has been deeply wronged, and you are about to become a man of significant means. We will not be accepting their first offer." He then laid out his plan. His retainer was $10,000, which he proposed to take from the eventual settlement. He would handle the entire negotiation. "I expect we can settle this for closer to $5 million, perhaps more," he stated, as if discussing the weather. "The city's zoning approval is contingent on them acquiring your parcel. They need you more than you need them." The words were a balm on a wound I didn't know was still open. Over the next 3 weeks, I remained at Golden Sunset, a ghost in their hallways. I ate their bland food, sat in their sterile common room, and nodded at the other residents. But I was no longer one of them. I was playing a part. David called me twice a week with updates. "Omnicorp has countered at $4.5 million, he'd say. I'd reply, "Do what you think is best." On November 1st, David called with the final number. "They've agreed to $5.2 million, Arthur. The paperwork will be ready to sign next week." I thanked him, hung up the phone, and looked at my bandaged hand. It still ached, a dull, constant reminder of what I had lost. But for the first time, I felt a different kind of power in it. The power to sign my name. The day the funds were transferred, November 15th, I checked myself out of Golden Sunset. I had 2 duffel bags containing all my worldly possessions. I took a taxi to a clean, unremarkable apartment complex on the other side of town. I had already signed a 6-month lease on a 1-bedroom unit for $1,800 a month. It was furnished with simple, modern furniture that had no history, no memories attached. It was a blank slate. The first thing I did was open the window. The air smelled of city traffic and rain, but it was fresh. It was the smell of freedom. My second call to David Chen was on November 17th. I was sitting on a new sofa, looking at a bank statement on my new laptop that showed a balance of $5, $190,000. "David," I said, "I need to ask you about another matter. The $75,000 I gave my daughter." I explained the circumstances, that it was my entire retirement savings, given for the down payment on their house on April 12, 2022. There was no formal contract, just a cashier's check and a hug at my kitchen table. "Was it officially documented as a gift for tax purposes?" he asked. "Did you file a gift tax return?" I had no idea what he was talking about. "No," I said. "I just gave her the check." I could almost hear him smile through the phone. "Good," he said. "In the absence of a formal gift agreement or a filed return, we can make a very strong case that it was a personal loan, an investment in the property, with an expectation of repayment upon sale of the asset or upon request, especially given their subsequent actions." He paused. "Do you want to pursue this, Arthur?" The question hung in the air. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the word, useless. It was about that rocking chair, sitting in their garage. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I do." My plan was taking shape, piece by meticulous piece. They thought they had stored me away in a dusty room, forgotten. They had no idea I was building a new foundation, not of wood, but of cold, hard, legal fact. And the first tremor was about to shake their perfectly curated world. The first official step of my new life was taken on December 1st. I was back in David Chen's office, the view of the city sprawling below us like a circuit board. The air was different this time. I wasn't an old man in a flannel shirt clutching a letter. I was a client. David slid a document across the polished mahogany desk. It was a formal demand letter, drafted on his firm's heavy cream-colored letterhead. "This is the first shot across the bow, Arthur," he explained, his voice even and professional. "It officially states your claim that the $75,000 provided on April 12, 2022 was a personal loan intended for the acquisition of their property. It demands full repayment within 30 days, he pointed to a specific paragraph. "We've calculated interest at the prime rate from the date of disbursement. The total amount due is $81,375. The precision of the number felt good. It was solid. Real. If they failed to respond or refused to pay," he continued, "the next step is to file a lawsuit and place a lien on their property. It will cloud the title, making it impossible for them to sell or refinance without settling the debt with you first. It effectively traps them." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Are you ready for me to send this?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The quiet click of his pen as he signed the letter was the sound of a lock turning. My next meeting, on December 5th, was with a man named Mr. Harrison, a financial advisor David had recommended. His office smelled of old paper and new money. He was a portly man with kind eyes who spoke in a language of portfolios, bonds, and long-term growth. I was completely out of my depth, but I listened. I learned. I told him my goal was not extravagant living, but security and control. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, we had a plan. We allocated $2 million to a diversified low-risk investment portfolio. Another $1 million went into municipal bonds, providing a steady, tax-free income of roughly $3,500 a month. I set aside $500,000 in a high-yield savings account for liquidity. The rest remained in a managed account for future opportunities. I left that office not just a man with money, but a man with a strategy. I was no longer living month to month on a carpenter's wages. I was building an empire on the foundations of their betrayal. The most difficult step came on December 7th. It felt underhanded, but David assured me it was a necessary part of due diligence. He connected me with a private investigator, a former police detective named Frank Miller. He was a quiet, unassuming man who looked more like a high school history teacher than someone who uncovered secrets for a living. I hired him for a simple task: to observe and report. I wanted to know their financial situation, their lifestyle, their routines. I needed to understand the enemy. His fee was $150 an hour plus expenses. The first payment of $5,000 felt like a necessary evil. The first report arrived via a secure email on December 14th. Frank was thorough. He had documented their spending habits for a full week. There were receipts from restaurants where a single dinner for two cost more than my weekly grocery budget at Golden Sunset. He included a photo of a brand new car in their driveway, a gleaming black 2023 BMW X5. A quick search of the license plate confirmed a new loan, with an estimated monthly payment of $150. He detailed Mark's golf club membership, which cost $12,000 a year, and Jessica's frequent trips to high-end boutiques. They were living far beyond their means, leveraging my $75,000 into a mountain of debt, all while I was supposed to be rotting away on a state pension. The report was printed on crisp white paper, a clinical, emotionless accounting of their greed. I read it under the sterile light of my new apartment's kitchen, and I didn't feel anger. I felt validation. The demand letter was delivered by certified mail on December 15th. Frank was parked across the street in his nondescript sedan. His report from that day was almost cinematic. He described Jessica retrieving the mail, her brow furrowing as she saw the law firm's logo. He watched through a telephoto lens as she opened it in the kitchen, her posture stiffening. Mark arrived home an hour later. Frank's report included a partial transcript, picked up by a directional microphone. The sound was distorted by the glass, but the words were clear enough. Mark's voice was loud, dismissive. "Ridiculous! He can't do this. It was a gift. The old fool has lost his mind." Jessica's voice was fainter, laced with something Frank described as anxiety. "Mark, it's from a lawyer. What if he can?" "He has nothing," Mark scoffed. "He's a broke old man in a nursing home. What's he gonna do, sue us with his pension check? This is just a pathetic scare tactic. Ignore it. It will go away." I read those words, broke old man in a nursing home, and a cold smile touched my lips for the first time in months. He had no idea. He was playing checkers while I was playing chess. He saw a pawn, weak and easily sacrificed. He couldn't see the board, couldn't see the pieces I was quietly moving into position. He couldn't see the king. I closed the laptop. The 30-day deadline began to tick down. I spent that time in quiet preparation. I continued my physical therapy, slowly regaining strength, if not dexterity, in my damaged hand. I bought new clothes, simple, well-made shirts and trousers that fit properly. I learned how to manage my finances online, tracking the slow, steady growth of my investments. Each day was a small act of rebuilding myself, brick by brick. They had tried to demolish me, to clear the lot and build their own shiny, hollow life on the rubble. They thought they had succeeded, but they had forgotten one fundamental rule of building, a rule I had lived by my entire life. You must always, always check the foundation, and theirs was about to crumble. The 30-day deadline expired on January 14th, a Tuesday. I remember it was a cold, clear day. From my apartment window on the 10th floor, I could see the city laid out below, sharp and defined in the winter air. There was no response to the demand letter. No phone call, no email, nothing. Just a profound, arrogant silence. They had followed Mark's advice. They had ignored it, believing it would simply go away. At 9:05 a.m., I called David Chen. "They didn't respond, David," I said, my voice steady. "Please proceed with the next step." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Consider it done, Arthur," he replied. "The lawsuit will be filed this morning. The lien against their property will be recorded with the county by the end of the day." I hung up the phone and drank my coffee, black and strong. The first real move on the board had been made. The explosion came 4 days later, on a Saturday afternoon. I was reading a book on historical architecture when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice was a raw, furious bark. It was Mark. He didn't even bother with a greeting. I could hear his strained breathing, the sound of a man whose perfect world had just been fractured. I remained silent, letting him vent his rage into the void. "A lien? You put a lien on my house?" "Our house?" he spat, the words dripping with disbelief and contempt. "We went to the bank this morning to consolidate some debt, get a better rate for the new car. We were rejected. Rejected because of you. Because of some fantasy you've cooked up in that senile head of yours." I took a slow breath, letting the quiet of my apartment act as a counterpoint to his fury. "It's not a fantasy, Mark," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. "It's a debt. The amount is $81,375. "It was a gift, you old fool," he shouted, his voice cracking. "A gift. You gave it to us. To Jessica, your own daughter." "My own daughter called me useless and put me in a home, Mark," I stated, the words delivered without heat, a simple statement of fact that changed the nature of our agreement. There was a choked sound on his end, a mix of fury and shock. He had expected me to crumble, to apologize, to be the weak old man he had created in his mind. He wasn't prepared for this cold, logical stranger. "You can't prove it was a loan." "There's no contract. We'll fight this. We'll see you in court and we will ruin you. You have nothing." "I wouldn't be so sure about that," I said softly. "You should probably have your lawyer look into the public records for land parcel 7B43 just outside the city limits. He'll find it quite illuminating." I paused, letting the information sink in. Any further communication on this matter should go through my attorney, David Chen. His number was on the letter you chose to ignore. And with that, I ended the call. I placed the phone on the coffee table and looked down at my hands. They were steady. The tremor of rage was all on his end of the line. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Jessica. Her approach was different. She was crying. The sobs sounded practiced, theatrical. "Daddy?" She wept into the phone. "What are you doing to us? Mark told me what you did. I don't understand. After everything we've done for you." The words trailed off into another heart-wrenching sob. "What have you done for me, Jessica?" I asked, my tone still quiet, still even. "We found you a place to live. We were taking care of you," she insisted, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "Why are you being so cruel? This isn't you. I know you're hurt about the accident, but you can't take it out on us. We're your family. I thought of the rocking chair I had built, the one made of maple in a father's dreams, now sitting in their garage collecting dust. I thought of the word useless. Family doesn't discard a person when they're no longer convenient, Jessica, I said. The line went quiet, her sobs ceasing for a moment. I had struck a nerve. Please, Daddy, she whispered, her voice now pleading, the tears replaced by a desperate urgency. Just drop this, please. We can't afford this. Mark is so stressed. This lien, it's a disaster. We'll come see you. We can talk it out, just like old times. There are no old times, Jessica, I said, and the finality in my own voice surprised even me. There is only the present. And in the present, you owe me $81,375. Speak to my lawyer. I hung up before she could respond. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the weight of my own resolve. They had played their cards. Arrogance and manipulation. Both had failed. They were beginning to understand that the game had changed, but they still had no idea who they were playing against. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. The meeting was set for January 28th at 10 in the morning. Not in a courthouse, but in a neutral space of my choosing, a glass-walled conference room in David Chen's office building. The room was cold, deliberately so. It overlooked the city from 20 floors up, the cars below moving like a silent, orderly river. A long, dark mahogany table polished to a mirror shine sat in the center, reflecting the gray winter sky. I sat at the head of it, with David to my right. I wore a simple navy blue sweater and gray trousers, clothes that were new but unremarkable. I wanted them to see me, not what I was wearing. The only thing on the table in front of me was a glass of water and a single, folded document. They arrived at 10:15, a calculated power move to make me wait. Mark walked in first, dressed in a tailored suit, his face a mask of forced confidence. He was trying to reclaim his territory, to act as if this was just another business negotiation he was destined to win. Jessica followed, looking pale and tired. The expensive coat she wore couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the nervous way she clutched her purse. They sat on the opposite side of the vast table, the distance between us feeling more like miles than feet. The heavy silence was broken only by the faint, distant hum of the city. Mark leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. "All right, Arthur," he began, his voice attempting a tone of weary reasonableness. "Let's cut the theatrics. This has gone on long enough. We received your ridiculous lawsuit. We are prepared to offer you $5,000 to drop this frivolous claim and go away." He said it with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if brushing away a fly. I didn't respond. I simply looked at him, my expression neutral. David Chen cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "My client is not here to negotiate. He is here to inform you of his terms." Mark scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "His terms? He has nothing. He's living on a disability check. We know what this is about. You're angry, you're lashing out. But this is the real world, and you can't afford a lawsuit like this." I finally spoke. My voice was low and every word was carefully chosen. "You're right, Mark. I can't afford a lawsuit on my disability check." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I watched the flicker of triumph in his eyes. Then I delivered the final blow, which is why I'll be funding it with the proceeds from the $5.2 million sale of my property to Omnicorp Developments. The transaction closed on November 15th. He stopped. The room was silent. They just stared. Jessica's mouth fell open slightly, a small, perfect O of disbelief. Mark's face went slack, the confident mask crumbling to reveal the raw shock beneath. He looked from me to David, then back to me, his brain scrambling to process the number. 5.2 million. The words hung in the air, shimmering and impossibly heavy. He had built his entire strategy on the assumption that I was a broke, powerless old man. In a single sentence, I had demolished his entire foundation. Jessica was the first to recover, her instincts for manipulation kicking in. Tears welled in her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling, You never told us. Why didn't you tell us? We're your family, we could have helped you." "Helped me?" I asked, my voice still quiet. Helped me into Golden Sunset Assisted Living? Helped me by calling me useless? That kind of help? We made a mistake, she cried, leaning forward, her hands pleading on the table. We were scared. We didn't know what to do. But this changes everything. We can be a family again. Please, just drop the lawsuit. It was a gift, Daddy. You know it was a gift. From a father to his daughter. I slowly pushed the folded document across the table. It slid over the polished surface and stopped directly in front of her. It was a photograph. A high-resolution glossy photo Frank had taken 2 days prior. It was a picture of the inside of their garage. In the corner, behind a stack of empty boxes and a Peloton bike, was the maple rocking chair. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, a forgotten relic. That, I said, my voice as hard and smooth as the wood I used to shape, was a gift. It was built with my hands, with my love, with my dreams for your future. You stored it in the garage like trash. The check for $75,000? That was an investment, and you have proven to be a very, very poor one. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the thick carpet. I was in complete control. The lawsuit will be dropped on 3 conditions. First, you will wire the full amount of $81,375 to an account David will provide. Second, you will deliver that rocking chair to my apartment, personally. And third, I looked directly at Jessica, her face now streaked with real tears of defeat. You will never contact me again. Not by phone, not by letter, not in person. To you and to your husband, I am gone. Mark was speechless, his face a pasty white. Jessica just sobbed, her head in her hands. The power in the room had shifted so completely, it was a physical force. They thought they had discarded me. But they had only given me the space I needed to rebuild. They saw an old man whose hands had become useless. They never once considered what his mind could still build. 2 days after the meeting, the rocking chair arrived. I watched from my apartment window as a small moving truck, not Mark's gleaming BMW, pulled up to the curb. He and Jessica got out. They looked smaller in the harsh light of the street, diminished. They didn't speak as they carefully unloaded the chair, their movements awkward and heavy with a silence that was far more potent than any argument. They placed it on the sidewalk, and Mark, without looking up, sent a brief text. A minute later, the building superintendent wheeled it up on a dolly. I never opened my door to them. I never saw their faces up close. They were just 2 figures on a screen, characters in a story that was now over. Their final act was one of silent, grudging obedience, and it was a more satisfying conclusion than any apology they could have manufactured. Once it was inside my apartment, I spent the rest of the afternoon with it. A fine layer of gray dust coated the smooth maple, a film of their neglect. I got a soft cloth and a bottle of wood polish, the kind with a lemon and oil scent. With my good left hand, I began to clean it, my motion slow and methodical. Each swipe of the cloth felt like I was wiping away not just the dust, but the entire last year. I was erasing the memory of it sitting forgotten in their cold garage. I was polishing away the sting of the word, useless. The wood beneath began to gleam with its original honey-colored warmth, the light catching in the deep, rich grain. The chair hadn't been made for this clean, modern apartment with its view of the city skyline. It was made for a quiet nursery, for lullabies I would never hear. But that dream was gone, and in its place was a hard-won reality. I placed it by the large window in my living room, the one that looked out over the endless sprawl of the city. It didn't belong here, and yet it was the only thing in the room that felt truly mine. It was no longer a cradle for my hopes for her. It was my throne. A monument to the skill of my hands, a testament to the fact that what a man builds with integrity can never truly be devalued by the ignorance of others. It was a reminder that my worth was not in my utility to them, but in the character and strength I had forged over a lifetime. It was a promise to myself that I would never again place my future in the hands of anyone but my own. My mornings are different now. I still wake before the sun, but not out of habit or necessity. I wake because I want to. I make my coffee, strong and black, and I don't sit in a worn-out armchair. I sit in the maple rocking chair. The runners make a soft, rhythmic sound on the hardwood floor, a gentle creak that is the sound of my peace. I watch the sky lighten, the city lights below twinkling out one by one as the sun rises. The air no longer smells of pine and sawdust from my own labor. But last week I bought a small, fragrant block of cedar wood. It sits on the windowsill, and when the morning sun hits it, a faint, clean scent fills the air. It's not the smell of work, it's the smell of memory, chosen and controlled. It's the smell of a life I have reclaimed. It's funny how life works. For 40 years I measured my worth by the sweat on my brow and the calluses on my hands. I thought my value was in what I could provide, what I could build for others. When my hands failed, I let my daughter and her husband convince me that I was worthless. They put a price tag on my existence, and when I couldn't pay, they discarded me. But they made a fundamental mistake. They confused a man's price with his value. My hands may have lost their skill, but my spirit, my integrity, those were things they could never touch and never truly understand. The money didn't save me. It was just a tool. What truly saved me was rediscovering that my worth was never in my hands to begin with. It was in my character. It was in the quiet dignity of a man who knows he lived an honest life. The greatest thing I ever built wasn't a table or a chair. It was the resilience to stand up for myself when I was told to lie down. So if you ever feel like the world has written you off, remember this old carpenter story. Your value isn't determined by your utility to others. It's forged in your own heart, and it's something no one can ever take away from you unless you let them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.